The great chamber of the Galactic Council fell silent as the holographic display showed another world burning. Vexhai stood at the center of the circular room, his blue crystalline skin reflecting the orange flames that consumed the planet Yathara. Around him, representatives from 47 different species watched in horror as the footage played out the same terrible story they had seen dozens of times before. The Korthek Empire had arrived 3 days ago. Their massive black ships had blocked out Yathara's sun as they descended through the atmosphere like hungry predators. The planet's defense fleet had lasted barely 6 hours. The ground forces had held out for 2 days before the final transmission went dark. 8 billion lives had been snuffed out in less than a week. Vexhai's voice echoed through the chamber as he spoke. This makes 37 worlds lost to the Korthek in the past 2 cycles. Their war machines adapt to every weapon we use against them. Their soldiers show no mercy to civilians. They take no prisoners and leave no survivors. The Thylorian representative paused as another delegate raised a tentacle. Kixmar of the Zentoran Collective stood slowly, his multiple eyes focused on the burning world displayed above them. What of the combined fleet we sent to Coronis Prime? Surely our united forces can stop them, Vexhai's expression darkened. The combined fleet was destroyed yesterday. All 847 ships. Only 3 escape pods made it back to tell us what happened. The Korthak have some new weapon that turns our own energy shields against us. Our most powerful dreadnoughts were cut in half like children's toys. A wave of despair swept through the chamber. These were not just military defeats. These were the deaths of entire civilizations. The Korthak Empire consumed everything in its path, converting peaceful worlds into lifeless rocks, stripped of all resources. Their emperor cared nothing for diplomacy or negotiation. He wanted only conquest and destruction. Dr. Zeleneth rose from her seat in the observer section. The elderly Vorkanian scientist had been studying galactic warfare patterns for over 2 centuries. Her scaled hide bore the deep purple markings of advanced age, and her voice carried the weight of accumulated wisdom. Council members, I request permission to present an alternative proposal. Vexhai gestured for her to approach the center platform. Dr. Zeleneth, we welcome any ideas. Our conventional military options have been exhausted. The scientist activated her personal datapad and projected a star chart above the chamber. A small yellow star appeared near the outer rim of the galaxy, marked with warning symbols in 17 different languages. I propose we contact the inhabitants of the world designated as Terra 3. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. Several delegates stood to object immediately. Terra 3 was Forbidden's territory, classified as a death world of the highest order. No sane species would attempt to colonize such a hostile environment. Dr. Zeleneth, interrupted Council Leader Thexfrin, his antenna twitching with agitation. Terra 3 is completely uninhabitable. The atmospheric composition alone would kill most of us within minutes. The surface conditions are beyond extreme. No intelligent life could possibly have evolved there. Zeleneth nodded calmly. That is what we believed until recently. However, long-range scans have detected artificial structures, energy signatures, and what appears to be a thriving industrial civilization. The inhabitants call themselves humans, and they have not only survived on Terra 3 but appear to have mastered their environment completely. She manipulated her controls and the display changed to show a detailed analysis of Earth's surface conditions. The assembled delegates gasped as the data scrolled past. Massive storms that could flatten cities. Temperature variations that ranged from freezing to scorching across the planet's surface. Atmospheric pressure that would crush most species. Gravity nearly twice the galactic standard. Radiation levels that should have prevented any complex life from developing. The planet experiences regular catastrophic events, Zeleneth continued. Volcanic eruptions that can alter global weather patterns. Earthquakes that split continents. Hurricanes with wind speeds exceeding 300 kilometers per hour. Ice ages that last for thousands of years. Yet somehow, intelligent life not only emerged from this chaos, but learned to thrive in it. Kixmar's tentacles writhed with nervous energy. Even if such beings exist, what makes you think they would help us? They have never attempted to contact the galactic community. They may be as hostile as the Korthik themselves. The scientist brought up intercepted communication signals from Earth. Our monitoring stations have been collecting their transmissions for decades. Their entertainment broadcasts, news reports, and cultural exchanges suggest a species capable of both great violence and remarkable compassion. They wage wars among themselves, yes, but they also show mercy to defeated enemies and care for their wounded. They have concepts of honor and sacrifice that the Korthik completely lack. Vexhai studied the data with growing interest. What kind of military capabilities do they possess? Unknown in detail, but their technology appears roughly equivalent to ours in some areas and surprisingly advanced in others. They have achieved faster-than-light travel, though they seem to use it sparingly. Their weapons technology appears focused on kinetic projectiles and controlled explosions rather than energy weapons. Most importantly, they have survived and prospered on a world that would kill any of us. The chamber fell quiet as the delegates considered this information. Contact with an unknown species was always risky, but their situation had become desperate. The Korthik advance showed no signs of slowing, and conventional resistance had proven futile. Council leader Thexrin called for order as the discussions grew heated. The proposal is highly irregular and extremely dangerous. We know nothing about these humans except that they live on a death world. They could be more savage than the Korthik. Dr. Zillaneth stood firm. With respect, Council Leader, we are facing extinction. The Korthik Empire will reach the core worlds within 10 cycles at their current rate of advance. Every peaceful option has failed, every military response has been crushed. If there is even a small chance that these Deathworlders might help us, we must take it. The debate continued for hours, but the mathematics were undeniable. At the current rate of loss, the Galactic Council would cease to exist within a year. Traditional diplomacy meant nothing to an enemy that viewed mercy as weakness. Conventional warfare had proven useless against opponents who adapted to every tactic and overcame every defense. Finally, Vexhai called for a formal vote. All in favor of authorizing contact with the inhabitants of Terra 3? Tentacles, claws, and appendages rose throughout the chamber. The count was close, but the motion passed. As the emergency session concluded, Dr. Zillaneth began preparations for the most important first contact in galactic history. She could only hope that the creatures who had mastered a death world might possess the strength to face an enemy that had defeated everyone else. The message would go out within hours, carrying the desperate plea of an entire galaxy to a species that had never known any world but the harshest one imaginable. Captain Jake Morrison was drinking his morning coffee when the universe changed forever. He stood on the observation deck of Luna Station, watching Earth rotate slowly beneath the morning sun, when Lieutenant Danny Price burst through the doors with a datapad clutched in his trembling hands. "Captain, you need to see this immediately," Danny said, his voice shaking with excitement and fear. "We just received a transmission from deep space. It's not from any human source." Jake set down his coffee cup and took the pad. The message had been translated by the station's computers, but the original mathematical sequences and universal constants proved its alien origin. As he read the desperate plea for help from something called the Galactic Council, his hands began to shake. The message spoke of an empire that destroyed entire worlds. It described a galaxy at war with billions of innocent lives hanging in the balance. Most shocking of all, it specifically requested help from Earth, calling humans the inhabitants of a death world and suggesting they might possess unique abilities to fight this threat. "Get me Admiral Lisa Carter immediately," Jake ordered. "Priority 1 emergency channel." Within minutes, the Admiral's stern face appeared on the communication screen. Lisa Carter had commanded Earth's defenses for 15 years. Having worked her way up from a fighter pilot to the head of the United Earth Military Command. Her gray hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her blue eyes showed the sharp intelligence that had kept Earth safe through several colonial conflicts. Captain Morrison, I assume this is about the alien transmission, she said without preamble. We received the same message at headquarters 20 minutes ago. I'm calling. An emergency session of the Global Defense Council in 2 hours. I need you to prepare a full analysis of the transmission's authenticity, Jake nodded. Already on it, Admiral. The mathematical proofs check out, and the astronomical data matches our star charts perfectly. This is real. 2 hours later, Jake found himself in the secure conference room beneath Mount Cheyenne, surrounded by the most powerful military and political leaders on Earth. President Alex Rodriguez sat at the head of the table, his weathered face showing the strain of leading humanity through its expansion into space. Defense Secretary Karen Bell reviewed the translated message for the third time, while General Bobby Lewis studied tactical projections on his tablet. Dr. Kevin Walsh, Earth's leading expert on theoretical alien contact, stood at the front of the room presenting his analysis. The biological and technological data they've included suggests a galaxy filled with peaceful species that evolved on much gentler worlds than Earth. Their atmospheric requirements, gravity preferences, and temperature ranges all fall within what we would consider extremely narrow comfort zones. What does that mean for us? President Rodriguez asked. Kevin pulled up a comparison chart. It means that what they consider a death world is simply home to us. Their message describes Earth's environment as impossibly hostile, yet we evolved. Here, naturally, the volcanic activity, extreme weather, predatory wildlife, and atmospheric composition that terrify them are just normal Tuesday for humans. Admiral Carter leaned forward. Dr. Walsh, in your professional opinion, are we capable of helping them? The scientist nodded slowly. More than capable. If their data is accurate, we're dealing with species that have never faced real adversity. They've never had to fight for survival against their own environment. They've never developed the kind of resilience and adaptability that humans take for granted. General Lewis spoke up from across the table. What about their enemy, this Korthak? Empire. The message says they've defeated every military force sent against them. That's where it gets interesting, Kevin replied. The Korthak appear to be the only other aggressive species in their galaxy, but even they evolved on a relatively gentle world compared to Earth. Their advantage comes from superior technology and ruthless tactics, not from any inherent toughness. President. Rodriguez stood and walked to the window overlooking the mountain range. They're asking us to fight a war that isn't ours, against an enemy we've never seen, for people we've never met. Yes, sir, Admiral Carter replied. But if we don't help them, and this Korthak Empire eventually discovers Earth, we'll face them alone with no allies. The room fell silent as everyone considered the implications. Earth had always assumed they were alone in the universe. Now, they discovered not only that alien life existed, but that an entire galactic civilization was crying out for help. Commander Ryan Beck entered the room and saluted sharply. Ryan had earned his reputation during the brutal Mars colonial wars, where rebel forces had used the hostile environment as a weapon against Earth forces. He was one of the few officers who truly understood how to fight in impossible conditions. Sir, I've been reviewing the tactical data they provided, Ryan said. Their standard military doctrine focuses on long-range energy weapons and defensive positioning. They seem to have no concept of close combat or fighting in hostile environments. Their enemies, the Korthak, use similar tactics but with better technology. Your assessment, Commander? The President asked. Ryan's eyes lit up with the confidence of a professional soldier. Sir, we could change everything. Human military doctrine has always been based on adapting to harsh conditions and overwhelming the enemy through superior tactics and determination. We train in environments that would kill most life forms. We use weapons designed to work in vacuum, extreme heat, toxic atmospheres, and crushing gravity. Admiral Carter activated the holographic display system. I'm authorizing the construction of our first interstellar battle fleet. We'll use the new fusion drives that can sustain long-distance travel, and we'll arm the ships with our most advanced kinetic weapons and defensive systems. Captain Amy Foster, commander of the exploration vessel UES Discovery, stepped forward. Admiral, I volunteer to lead the support fleet. My crew has experience with deep space operations and first contact protocols. Colonel Chris Taylor, head of the Marine Expeditionary Force, nodded his agreement. My Marines are ready for deployment. We've been training for hostile environment combat since the formation of the unit. This is exactly what we prepared for. President. Rodriguez returned to his seat and looked around the table. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to make the most important decision in human history. We can ignore this message and hope the problem never reaches us, or we can step forward and help save an entire galaxy. General Lewis activated his tactical computer. Mr. President, if we're going to do this, we need to do it right. Full military deployment, with the understanding that we're not just fighting a battle, but potentially changing the balance of power in the galaxy. The President nodded slowly. Very well. Admiral Carter, you have authorization to begin immediate preparations for humanity's first interstellar military campaign. Dr. Walsh, I want you to prepare a response to the Galactic Council. Tell them that Earth accepts their request for assistance. The meeting concluded, Jake Morrison found himself assigned as tactical coordinator for the mission. Looking around the room at the determined faces of his colleagues, he realized that humanity was about to discover just how unique their harsh homeworld had made them. The galaxy was about to meet the Deathworlders, and nothing would ever be the same. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kalos system and immediately faced a scene of chaos that would have terrified any sane military commander. 17 massive Korthak dreadnoughts surrounded the planet like vultures, circling wounded prey, their black hulls absorbing light and reflecting nothing back into space. The surviving Galactic Council ships huddled close to the planet's surface, their energy shields flickering weakly under constant bombardment. Admiral Vex Run watched his tactical display with growing despair as another of his cruisers exploded in brilliant orange flames. His fleet had been under siege for 6 days, and ammunition was running dangerously low. The Korthak seemed content to slowly crush them rather than risk a direct assault, wearing down their defenses until surrender became inevitable. Admiral, we're detecting new hyperspace signatures, reported his sensor officer, a young Zentoran whose voice shook with exhaustion. 3 unknown vessels are approaching from the outer system. Vexrin barely looked up from his damage reports. Probably more Korthak reinforcements. Signal all remaining ships to prepare for final defensive positions, but the sensor readings made no sense. These new ships weren't using standard galactic identification codes, and their design appeared completely alien to both Council and Korthak technology. They were smaller than the massive dreadnoughts, but moved with a speed and aggressiveness that defied conventional tactical wisdom. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, studying the battle raging before them. His ship was built using Earth's harsh lessons learned from fighting in the asteroid belts and the toxic storms of Jupiter's moons. Every system had backups, every hull plate was designed to withstand meteor impacts, and every weapon was tested in the brutal environment of space. Captain, I'm reading 17 enemy dreadnoughts and maybe 40 Council ships still operational, reported Lieutenant Sarah Kim from the sensor station. The Council fleet looks pretty beaten up. Jake nodded grimly. Signal Captain Foster. And Colonel Taylor, tell them we're going in hard and fast. No fancy maneuvers, no careful positioning. We hit them before they know what's happening. What happened next shocked every military observer in the system. Instead of requesting tactical updates or establishing communication with the Council fleet, the human ships dove directly into the combat zone at maximum acceleration. They ignored the massive energy weapons that could vaporize smaller vessels and charged straight at targets that outweighed them 10-1. The used Defiance opened fire with its kinetic rail guns while still accelerating toward the nearest Korthak dreadnought. The tungsten projectiles moved at a significant fraction of light speed, punching through energy shields that had deflected every Council weapon. The Korthak ship shuddered under impacts that sent massive chunks of armor spinning into space. Commander Ryan Beck watched his tactical display with the cold satisfaction of a predator that had found prey. Target their engines first? These big ships can't maneuver worth a damn once they lose power. The Korthic fleet tried to respond with their standard tactics, but the humans refused to follow galactic combat protocols. When plasma storms disabled the Defiance's forward shields, Captain Morrison simply rotated the ship to present fresh armor and kept firing. When the U's resilience lost atmospheric pressure in 3 compartments, Captain Foster sealed the breaches and continued her attack run. Admiral Vexrun stared at his displays in amazement as he watched the human vessels perform maneuvers that should have been impossible. Are they insane? That ship just flew through a plasma storm that would cook our crews alive. His tactical officer, a veteran of dozens of battles, shook his head in disbelief. So they're not even slowing down. One of their ships has hull breaches in 4 sections and it's still firing at full capacity. The humans fought like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. When their energy weapons failed, they switched to kinetic projectiles. When their shields collapsed, they used their armor. When their armor was breached, they sealed the holes and kept fighting. They showed no fear of vacuum exposure, radiation, or the extreme temperatures of space combat. Colonel Chris Taylor led the first boarding. Action in galactic history when his Marines used cutting torches to breach the hull of a disabled Korthic cruiser. The enemy had never faced opponents who could survive in a depressurized, radiation-flooded environment long enough to fight hand-to-hand combat in spacesuits. Colonel, the atmosphere in this ship is toxic to most species, reported Sergeant Lucy Harper as her team advanced through the enemy corridors. Pressure is 3 times Earth normal and the air is full of corrosive compounds. Chris Taylor's voice came back calm and steady. Just another day at the office, Sergeant. Keep moving. The Korthic crew had never encountered enemies who could function in conditions that would kill them within minutes. Their biomechanical enhancements were designed for their home environment, not for fighting humans who had evolved on a world where surviving another day was never guaranteed. Captain Amy Foster coordinated the fleet's movements while her ship suffered damage that would have forced any Council vessel to retreat. Damage report, she called out as another plasma blast tore through her port armor. Hull breach on Deck 7, engines at 60%, life support is stable, came the reply from her chief engineer. We can keep fighting, Captain. The battle that had raged for 6 days ended in less than 4 hours after the humans arrived. The Korthic fleet, designed to overwhelm opponents through superior firepower and advanced technology, found themselves facing enemies who simply refused to be overwhelmed. When their weapons damaged human ships, the humans adapted and kept fighting. When their shields failed under human attacks, they had no backup plan for opponents who could survive and fight in conditions that killed everything else. Admiral Vexrun watched the last Korthic dreadnought explode in a brilliant flash of light, and realized that everything he understood about warfare had just changed forever. These humans, these Deathworlders, had single-handedly broken a siege that had seemed hopeless just hours before. Admiral, the human fleet commander is requesting communication. His communications officer reported. Captain Morrison's image appeared on the main screen, his uniform torn and a small cut on his forehead from where debris had struck during the battle. Admiral Vexrun, I presume. Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earth Fleet. Sorry, we're a bit late to the party. Vexrun could only stare at this creature who had just saved his fleet and possibly his entire civilization. Captain Morrison, how did you survive that battle? Your ships took damage that should have destroyed them. Jake shrugged casually. Admiral, we're from Earth. This was just another day at the office for us. Are your people ready to take this fight to the enemy? Dr. Zeleneth stood in the medical bay of the Council flagship, watching in fascination as Major Tom Brooks treated wounded soldiers from 3 different species while ignoring his own injuries. The human combat medic had taken shrapnel to his left arm during the boarding action, but he continued working on a Thylorian pilot whose blue blood was leaking from multiple wounds. Your injury requires immediate attention, Zeleneth told him, her scientific curiosity overriding normal medical protocol. The metal fragments could cause infection or nerve damage. Tom glanced at her briefly while sealing another wound on the pilot. Doc, I've had worse injuries from falling off my bike as a kid. This guy needs help more than I do right now. The Vorkanian scientist had been studying human behavior since their arrival, trying to understand what made these Deathworlders so different from every other species in the galaxy. Their physical capabilities were impressive enough, but their psychological makeup was even more remarkable. They seemed to operate under completely different rules about acceptable risk and personal safety. Lieutenant Nick Davis sat nearby, holding the hand of a young Zentoran engineer who had been trapped in a damaged compartment for hours. The alien's multiple eyes showed the deep trauma of someone who had never experienced real danger before, and he trembled despite the warm blankets wrapped around him. "You're safe now," Nick said softly, his voice carrying the kind of calm confidence that came from surviving real hardship. "My team pulled you out of worse situations than that. You did good holding on as long as you did." Zillaneth made notes on her datapad as she observed the interaction. The humans showed what their species called empathy, but it went deeper than simple concern for others. This was the behavior of a creature that understood suffering and had learned to help others endure it. On most worlds, such trauma would require months of psychological treatment. These humans simply accepted it as part of life and moved on. Captain Amy Foster limped into the medical bay, her left leg clearly causing her pain from the battle damage to her ship. She had stayed at her post for 12 hours after the fighting ended, coordinating repairs and rescue operations while the medical team worked on more seriously injured crew members. "Major Brooks, how are our people doing?" she asked, refusing the chair that Dr. Zillaneth offered her. "6 wounded, none critical," Tom replied while checking the vital signs of a council officer. "Johnson has a concussion, Martinez has second-degree burns on his hands, and Rodriguez twisted his ankle pretty bad during the boarding action. Everyone else is just minor cuts and bruises." Amy nodded with satisfaction. "Good work, Major. Make sure you get that arm looked at when you have time." Zillaneth watched this exchange with growing amazement. The human captain had just fought a battle that would have been considered impossible by galactic standards. Her ship had suffered damage that should have killed her entire crew, and she was more concerned about her subordinates than her own. "Obvious injuries. Captain Foster, may I ask you a question?" The scientist said, "How do your people maintain such calm in situations that would terrify most species?" Amy looked puzzled by the question. "Doc, this wasn't that bad. We've all been through worse during training exercises. The Mars colonial wars were a lot nastier than this fight, and we had to deal with toxic atmosphere, extreme cold, and equipment failures all at the same time." The captain paused as she watched Tom Brooks finally allow a medical technician to remove the shrapnel from his arm. "I guess we just learned early that life doesn't give you easy choices. You either adapt to the situation and keep going, or you don't survive to face the next challenge." Sergeant Lucy Harper entered the medical bay carrying a datapad filled with after-action reports. Her face showed the kind of controlled anger that Zillaneth had never seen before. It wasn't the blind rage that led to poor decisions, but rather a cold, focused fury that seemed to make the human even more dangerous. "Captain, you need to see the intelligence data we recovered from that Korthik ship," Lucy said, her voice tight with emotion. "They've been keeping detailed records of every world they've destroyed. Pictures, videos, population counts, they treat it like some kind of game." Amy took the datapad and scrolled through the files, her expression growing harder with each image. Zillaneth could see the moment when the human captain's professional detachment gave way to something far more personal and dangerous. 8 billion civilians on Yathara, Amy said quietly. They had families, children, dreams for the future. The Korthek killed them all for resources and territory. The scientist observed how this information affected the humans differently than it would most species. Instead of despair or paralyzing horror, they showed what their military manuals called righteous anger. It was emotion channeled into purpose, fury transformed into determination. Colonel Chris Taylor joined them, still wearing his battle armor with scorch marks from enemy weapons. "Captain, my Marines found something else in the Korthik database. They have detailed intelligence on every major council world. including population densities, defensive capabilities, and resource estimates. This isn't random conquest. They've been planning this campaign for decades. Nick Davis looked up from comforting the traumatized engineer. How many more worlds are on their target list? Chris consulted his datapad. All of them. Every inhabited planet in Council space. They plan to strip mine the entire galaxy and convert it into raw materials for their empire. The room fell silent as the full scope of the threat became clear. This wasn't just warfare between competing civilizations. This was attempted genocide on a galactic scale, conducted by creatures who viewed all other life as obstacles to be removed. Dr. Zeleneth watched the humans process this information and saw something that gave her hope for the first time since the crisis began. These Deathworlders didn't just possess superior fighting abilities. They had evolved a moral framework that made such wholesale slaughter unthinkable. Their harsh world had taught them the value of life, not its cheapness. "Captain," she said, carefully, "in your professional opinion, can the Korthic Empire be stopped?" Amy Foster's eyes showed the kind of cold determination that had allowed humans to survive ice ages, asteroid impacts, and global disasters. "Doc, we stopped them at Kalos, and that was just 3 ships with limited supplies. Give us a proper fleet and enough time to prepare, and we'll end this war." Tom Brooks finished treating the last wounded soldier and finally sat down to have his own injuries examined. "The way I see it, we've got 2 choices. We can let these bastards keep murdering innocent people, or we can show them what happens when you threaten someone under human protection." Sergeant Lucy Harper nodded grimly. "I vote for option 2. These Korthic need to learn that some fights aren't worth picking." As Zeleneth continued her observations, she began to understand why the desperate message to Earth had been humanity's first contact with galactic civilization. These weren't just warriors who had mastered a death world. They were protectors, who had learned that strength without mercy was just another form of destruction, and that some causes were worth any sacrifice. The fortress world of Vorthak Prime hung in space like a metal cancer, its surface covered with massive defense installations and weapon platforms that could destroy entire fleets. Emperor Korthak stood in his command center deep within the planet's core, watching the approaching human fleet with a mixture of curiosity and contempt. These small creatures had somehow defeated his outer forces, but they had never faced the full might of his empire's ultimate stronghold. "My Emperor, the human fleet consists of only 12 vessels," reported General Vexthek, his biomechanical enhancements glowing softly in the dim light. "Our orbital defense grid includes over 300 weapon platforms and enough firepower to sterilize a moon. They cannot possibly break through our defenses." Emperor Korthak's multiple eyes focused on the tactical display showing the approaching ships. "These humans have proven surprisingly resourceful, General. Do not underestimate them as our other commanders did. Activate all defensive systems and prepare the quantum shields. If they want to die at our strongest fortress, we shall accommodate them." Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, studying the massive fortifications that surrounded Vorthak Prime. The planet bristled with weapons like a metal porcupine, each installation capable of destroying a capital ship with a single shot. Any conventional military force would need hundreds of vessels to even attempt an assault on such a target. "Captain, I'm reading energy signatures unlike anything in our database," reported Lieutenant Sarah Kim. "Those quantum shields are putting out enough power to deflect our heaviest weapons." Jake nodded grimly. "Signal the fleet. We're going to have to do this the hard way. Colonel Taylor, are your Marines ready for ground assault?" Colonel Chris Taylor's voice came back steady and confident. "My teams are loaded and ready, Captain. We've identified weak points in their shield grid, but we'll need to get through that orbital defense network first." The human fleet split into 3 groups and began their approach using a tactic that would have been suicide for any other species. Instead of staying together for mutual protection, they spread out and accelerated toward the planet at maximum speed, presenting multiple targets that the defense grid couldn't track effectively. Captain Amy Foster commanded the second group. Aboard the used Resilience, her ship already showing battle damage from previous engagements. All ships, remember the plan. We're not trying to destroy those defense platforms. We just need to get close enough to deploy the ground teams. The orbital battle began with a barrage of energy weapons that lit up space like a deadly fireworks. Display. The Korthik defense grid poured thousands of plasma bolts and particle beams at the approaching human vessels, expecting to vaporize them in minutes. Instead, the human ships did something unprecedented in galactic warfare history. They flew directly through the weapon fire. Lieutenant Nick Davis piloted his assault transport through a storm of energy weapons that should have reduced his ship to vapor. When his forward shields failed, he rotated the vessel to present fresh armor. When that armor began to melt under the intense heat, he activated emergency cooling systems and kept flying. The transport shook and groaned under the punishment, but it continued toward its target. "Nick, your ship is taking critical damage," Amy's voice crackled over the communication system. "Pull back and let someone else make the run." "Negative, Captain," Nick replied calmly. "I've got Marines counting on me to get them to the surface. This old bird has a few more minutes of fight left in her." Emperor Korthak watched in disbelief, as the human vessels refused to be deterred by weapon fire that had stopped every previous attack. "How are they still functional?" "Our sensors show massive hull breaches and system failures across their entire fleet." General Vexthek studied the tactical displays with growing concern. "My Emperor, they appear to be sealing hull breaches in real time and rerouting power around damaged systems. Their ships are still accelerating despite damage that should have crippled them." The first breakthrough came when Sergeant Lucy Harper's team managed to reach the surface of Vorthek, prime in a transport that was more wreckage than spacecraft. The planet's atmosphere was toxic to most galactic species, filled with corrosive compounds and superheated gases that could kill within seconds. For humans who had evolved breathing Earth's chaotic atmosphere, it was just another hostile environment to overcome. "Atmospheric analysis complete," Lucy reported as her Marines deployed from the crashed transport. "Air is toxic, gravity is twice Earth normal, surface temperature is hot enough to cook most species. Pretty much a typical Tuesday for us." Colonel Chris Taylor coordinated the ground assault from his Mogul command post, watching as his Marines advanced through conditions that would have been impossible for any other military force. "All teams, remember the objective. We need to take out those shield generators so the fleet can get through to the command center." The Korthak ground forces had never faced enemies who could operate effectively in their own planetary environment. Their biomechanical enhancements were designed for their homeworld's conditions, not for fighting opponents who thrived in hostile environments. When the humans attacked through toxic gas clouds and superheated terrain, the defenders found themselves at a fatal disadvantage. Major Tom Brooks led his team through a maintenance tunnel filled with radiation levels that would have killed most galactic species within minutes. "Radiation badges are showing red across the board," he reported cheerfully. "Good thing we brought the heavy suits. Johnson, watch your step. That coolant leak could burn through your boots." The shield generators fell one by one as human teams reached positions that the Korthak had considered impossible to attack. When the quantum shields finally collapsed, the remaining human ships dove toward the planet's surface like meteors, their hulls glowing red-hot from atmospheric entry at speeds that should have been fatal. Emperor Korthak found himself facing enemies in his own command center, creatures who had fought their way through defenses that had never been breached. Captain Jake Morrison stood before him, his uniform torn and his face showing the exhaustion of someone who had fought through impossible odds. "Emperor Korthak," Jake said quietly, "your war is over. Your fleets are destroyed, your fortress has fallen, and your empire is finished. The question now is whether you want to end this with more bloodshed or if you're ready to discuss terms." The Emperor's multiple eyes blazed with fury and disbelief. "You cannot defeat me, human. I am the master of 1,000 worlds. I have conquered species that you have never dreamed of. And now you're conquered by a species you never bothered to understand," Jake replied. "Your choice, Emperor. Surrender and live, or keep fighting and die. Either way, the killing stops here." For the first time in his long life, Emperor Korthik found himself facing an enemy who offered mercy even in the moment of total victory. The humans had proven they could destroy his empire, yet they offered him the chance to live. It was a concept so foreign to his experience that he could barely comprehend it. "Why?" the emperor asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why show mercy to an enemy who would have shown you none?" Jake looked at the fallen tyrant with something that might have been pity, because that's what separates us from you, Emperor. We learned on our death world that strength without compassion is just another form of weakness. You're going to live in exile and think about that for the rest of your days? 6 months later, Dr. Kevin Walsh stood in the newly constructed Earth Embassy on Zentara Prime, watching ships from dozens of worlds arrive for the formal ceremony welcoming humanity into the Galactic Council. The Deathworlders had not conquered the galaxy as so many species had feared. Instead, they had saved it and proven that the harshest worlds sometimes produce the gentlest protectors.